Good morning and welcome to another live stream with DD Geopolitics. I am your host, Sarah. Again, apologies for yesterday and the mix-up. We are really proud and honored to welcome Senator Richard Black today. Senator Black served in the Virginia State Senate from 2012 to 2020 and in the Virginia House of Delegates from 1998 to 2006. A retired colonel and former chief of the Criminal Law Division at the Pentagon, Senator Black is known for his strong conservative values and public service. Please welcome Senator Black. How are you this morning?
Thank you, Sarah. I'm happy to be with you.
Happy. Yes. So we were recently invited to your press conference, your emergency press conference with our wonderful friends, Scott Ritter and Ray McGovern, but we were unable to attend because we are in the wrong Washington for that. But it had a pretty foreboding title, Emergency Press Conference, The Danger of Nuclear War is Real and Must Be Stopped. Can you give our listeners a brief synopsis of the message you guys wanted to convey in the conference? We'll also link you guys. It is a long conference with many really great speakers. And why did the Schiller Institute feel it necessary to call an emergency press conference? Was it something specific that triggered it, or this was something that needed to happen?
I think it's a confluence of a number of things, and it's the fact that as we approach the November elections, it is so vital for the Biden administration that the project in Ukraine not collapse before the election. That would be a disaster. And so we see this constant ratcheting up. What called the Schiller Institute to conduct this emergency press conference was several things that we're observing taking place. The deep attacks being conducted by Ukraine are all done in coordination with the Central Intelligence Agency and the Pentagon. And what we're seeing happen is we have had several attacks now to attempt to blind Moscow's early warning radars, the major radar systems that detect incoming theater ballistic missiles. These things have always been untouchable. The idea that anyone would attack that aspect of the nuclear deterrence of any country, whether it's the United States, Russia, China, Israel, any of the nuclear powered countries, it is so outrageous, because what happens is that any nuclear power, and we're talking about the two greatest nuclear powers on earth, Russia and the United States. No one's entirely certain which is the greater power, but in any event, both have the power to set off a series of annihilations that end civilization across the globe. And so each side has to look at what the other side is doing, not what they say, because the consequences of being wrong are so monumental. You can't use your nuclear deterrence if you are totally surprised and destroyed. So you have to look, and you're always studying what's the other side doing. When you see the other side begin to blind your nuclear deterrence, to blind you so that you cannot see inbound missiles, then immediately you have to say, why is this? Why is this other great nuclear power trying to blind us so that we can't detect their incoming missiles? So that was one, and it's actually the confluence of several things. The attack on the radars, attempting to blind them to incoming NATO missiles, US missiles. The fact that there have now been repeated attacks by Ukraine on the Engels Air Base. Now, Engels Air Base is very important because it is part of the nuclear triad of Russia. The nuclear triad is that, you know, you've got your ground-based missiles, you have major jet aircraft that carry nuclear weapons, and then you've got your submarine based missiles. Now, so here we see Ukraine with the targeting assistance, most likely, of the United States, and it's making repeated attacks and has actually hit some of the jet aircraft that are on watch, ready to respond to a nuclear attack. And so this is the second thing. First, we're blinding them from the nuclear missiles. Then we are attacking their nuclear response capability. And now, in addition to that, the United States has coordinated with, you know, there are a number of NATO countries involved. We trained F-16 pilots, and we are on the verge of introducing F-16 jet aircraft into the theater of war. Now, the problem with the F-16 is that these aircraft are nuclear capable. When they're detected by Russia, Russia has no way of telling whether they're carrying a nuclear bomb or nuclear missile also, or whether they are simply going to drop conventional bombs. Russia cannot afford, nor could the United States afford to assume that the other side, you know, has feelings of goodwill or something, or that they never do something crazy. Yes. So Russia, we're putting Russia in a position of looking out through partially blinded eyes, ready to respond in case there is a nuclear Pearl Harbor launched against them, and seeing that already their nuclear deterrence is being deliberately damaged, and then wondering, okay, at what point do we respond? At what point does this become not just sort of reckless provocations or bluffing and bullying? At what point does this become an all-out attack that will, you know, if the United States attacks and with the help of NATO, it will destroy Russia. It will knock out all of the population centers. And I think part of what has gone on now for a long time is that President Putin has been working very hard to somehow get through to the American people that that our government is playing an extraordinarily reckless game. It's sort of a game of chicken on the most dangerous playboard in the world, and we risk reaching some undefined point where Russia feels threatened and the decision is made to respond. And I think our fear is that, you know, very early in the Ukraine war, the point where Russia got involved, very early on there, I believe there was an Italian retired general. I think it was someone from Italy, and he said it's as though NATO is sleepwalking into World War III. And you go back to World War I. World War I began with the assassination of the Archduke of Austria-Hungary and his wife. They were both shot killed in Serbia. And Austria-Hungary responded by declaring war on Serbia, and then a whole chain of events just began hitting, just one by one, and soon the whole world was at war. We see this happening today, not the way that it happened in World War I, which was in a flash. It just happened with such rapidity that it was stunning, and the whole world just woke up, and suddenly the world was at war. This is different. This is as though we are sleepwalking slowly and gradually into this escalation, this very dangerous escalation. And we see it continuing. I can see it happening with events now with the alliance that was just formed between Russia and North Korea.
Yeah,
so
we're gonna get into that too. But first, you kept saying in your press conference, you kept saying a nuclear accident, which I thought was an interesting choice of words. Instead of a nuclear attack or a nuclear war, it was an accident. Why the word accident? Is that because we are depleting Russia's capabilities to deter the actual nukes, and it may get through, or what did you mean by an accident?
Well, if you go back and you look from the time that this whole thing started, I think to those of us who study this type of thing very intensely, we recognize that this war in Ukraine wasn't something that just sort of sprung up and happened. It certainly was not a case of Russia plotting and planning something and saying, okay, this is an opportunity for us. When Russia crossed the border, they were not ready for a war. Their military was not structured. They were not ready for it. But as former President Trump and as Nigel Farage just pointed out, this began with a provocation. This was NATO moving very deliberately, very aggressively, not as a defensive alliance, but as an offensive alliance, moving very directly in order to provoke Russia into what we knew they would do. This was something that had been discussed at the highest level by William Burns in 2008, when the first steps were taken to allow Ukraine and the nation of Georgia to make application for membership in NATO. This was it was an extremely dangerous move. We accepted that. That was a very preliminary step, but then we continued. We've marched forward. At one time, we had 1,000 miles between the border of the reunified Germany and the Russian border. This was an enormous buffer. It was one of the great blessings of mankind that when the Soviet Union dissolved, there was suddenly this tremendous distance that gave us a buffer, safety buffer between the nuclear powers. We have deliberately decided to put ourselves where we are again nose to nose, two nuclear powers facing one another within rock-throwing distance across the border, because our plan, the plan of Barack Obama when he was the president, he overthrew the government of Ukraine with the duly elected president Yanukovych. He had been popularly elected by all of the people of Ukraine, including the Russian speakers. And the decision was made that we're going to overthrow him. We're going to put in place a revolutionary junta. And this is what we did. And the U.S. State Department literally handpicked members of the junta to take charge. Now, when they took charge, one of the very first things they did was to outlaw the Russian language. Well, 17% of the population of Ukraine speaks Russian, and the majority of them speak only Russian. They don't speak, they're not bilingual necessarily. And it's so deeply entrenched, the Russian language, that Zelensky was a Russian speaker. He normally spoke in Russian until this war broke out. And so when that was done, this was such a tremendous affront to the Russian-speaking people who are in the areas that are being fought over right now. And so they declared their independence. The American Revolutionary War started over some rather minor taxes that were being imposed, and people went berserk over it, and we ended up with a new nation here in this country. Had Great Britain, instead of saying, well, we're going to put a tax on tea, if they had said, well, starting a month from now, everybody in the United States will have to speak German, and if you can't speak German, you can't do business, and you can't petition your government. You're just out of it. Well, you can only imagine the explosion that would have occurred from that, given what we saw occurred with these minor taxes that were imposed. So for the Donbass republics and for Crimea to declare their independence was absolutely reasonable. They had the soundest possible basis for doing it. Russia was desperate to get this new revolutionary junta to be reasonable, and President Putin, back in 2021, he put specific proposals on the table with NATO. He said, look, there's some things we need to do. We've got to ward off this war. NATO, which is run by the United States, we have a 4-star general who, ever since Second World War, has been the controller of NATO. And we just simply brushed it off because we had dumped billions of dollars of arms into creating a huge new Ukrainian army, and we thought they were ready to go. And we knew that Russia would be forced into fighting, and they were. And I was pleased to see Donald Trump, who is now running for president, come out and say, he said, when I listened to Biden, he said he's saying all the wrong things. He's talking about Ukraine joining NATO, and Trump said, I said, this is crazy. This man is going to take us to war. Well, and that's so exactly what he did. Yeah.
So, you said it before, Ukraine was never a vital interest to the United States, but it appears to be a vital interest to France, or at least to Macron. You've talked about the Foreign Legion troops in Ukraine. We expected them, along with a few of our analyst friends, we expected them to go to the south, probably Coastal Nikolaev, or to kind of quell the storm coming for Odessa. But we keep seeing them being blown up in Kharkiv, up in the north. What do you make of that, and why are they in the north, and why isn't France protecting Odessa?
Macron, France is one thing, Macron is another. Okay, as the recent election showed, the French people are not behind Macron. Macron is an army of one who is coordinating with NATO, with the US. He was the guy who was the designated hitter. The way that NATO works is typically they'll float a trial balloon. And there's a sort of a regular pattern. they get one country or the other to float a trial balloon. For example, somebody will say, well, we ought to give Ukraine HIMARS missiles. They're longer range. We'll give them HIMARS missiles. And then immediately several countries come out and say, that's outrageous. We're never going to do that. That would lead to this and that. And then it keeps up. Give them HIMARS missiles. Give them HIMARS missiles. And at a certain point, then another country will say, well, yeah, I think we should give them HIMARS missiles. And then some country that's not a big military power would say, we're going to give them some HIMARS missiles. Well, of course, that's been cleared with the US and with all these. And then they give HIMARS missiles. And then somebody else another country is the designated hitter. We ought to send them heavy battle tanks. And this worked out where the designated hitter was in Great Britain. And they said, well, finally they said, after all of no, we can't do that. That's outrageous. Then finally Britain says, well, we're going to give them Centurion tanks. And the next thing, oh, well, somebody else said, well, we'll give a few tanks too. We can give some Leopard tanks. We'll kick in a few. And then the next thing, the US is saying, yeah, we'll send them one tank. This goes on all the time. And it just keeps ratcheting higher. And that's what happened with the F-16s. Mm-hmm. Well, the same thing where, they were talk about sending jets and oh, that's outrage. We'll never accept it. And it's just this way of just incrementally building this pathway to war. So the people of the West are not prepared for war, but the leaders are. Now back to Macron. Macron became the designated hitter for the trial balloon that would say, let's send NATO troops to fight directly against the Russians and kick off World War III. Now, he didn't use those words. He said, we're ready to send French troops if necessary, and we'll put them inside Ukraine, and they'll train Ukrainian troops. Well, of course, there's no question that would mean that they're engaged in battle right away. And so what you had, and it's just kind of interesting to watch the way they do. So when he made that announcement, immediately you had, several countries come, oh, that's outrageous. Estonia said, that's a good idea. Now, Estonia is about the size of my backyard. Okay.
And I think it's smaller than New York City.
Yeah, and they don't amount to anything. And so, but right away they said, yeah, that's a good idea. And now most Americans, they don't know Estonia from Latvia, from Poland, from Czechoslovakia. They're all, stuff over there. So to them, okay, well, there's a country that said yes. And then the Polish government made some sort of equivocal, some sort of approval. And then, I don't know, maybe Finland, I can't even remember. But it's all orchestrated in a very careful way. And some of us were able to generate a backlash to that. And so there was some backing off from it. But that doesn't mean that the project stops. Now, then Macron sent French troops into Ukraine. He didn't announce that they were going into Ukraine, but he started sending them. Apparently, they were French foreign legionnaires. And I guess under the laws of France, that somehow creates some distance between, well, we're going in and some, the French Foreign Legion is going in. Well, the French Foreign Legion is France. So French troops went in very, very quickly. They started being killed.
Yeah.
And I've seen videos where their bodies are being turned so that you can see the French flag on their fatigues. I mean, they go in wearing French flags. Now, NATO has sent a number of military personnel, military officers into Ukraine, and it's done surreptitiously. It's not done openly, but on various occasions, the Russians, after they've watched these buildups for a while, particularly at a hotel sometimes, where they'll have all these people, all these communications, and Russia watches them. It's not that they discover them and strike them, but sometimes they just let them build up and let them see how many people they can get in, and then at an opportune time they knock them out. And then we know from intelligence, nothing that I'm saying is based on classified intelligence. All of this is open source, but there's tremendous amount of open source intelligence. And so we know that there have been general officers of NATO countries who have been killed while they were serving in Ukraine. And we know many senior officers have been. So we saw, Macron, he sent the legionnaires in. I don't know how many there. Could be hundreds, it could be 1,000, but he sent them in, and many started being killed right off the bat. Now, what's interesting, of course, he's the designated hitter, but sometimes there are consequences to being up to bat, because sometimes the pitcher throws a ball and you get hit in the forehead, and that's what happened to Emmanuel Macron. Is the elections for the EU Parliament were held, and they were a disaster for Macron. Just and they were really a disaster for
a lot of people.
all of the war-making states of NATO. I mean, they all suffered terribly, and probably no one more dramatically than Macron, because he was the guy who was going to send France to war with Russia, and who sent people to die on the front with no permission by anybody. And so he got what he deserved. He's had to call for snap elections. That seems to have been a disastrous move on his part. And it's beginning to look like the French piece of the alliance is likely to end up, opposed to the war with Russia. So, and this is with Chancellor Scholz in Germany. All of a sudden, he's suffered enormous setbacks to the point where it seems unlikely that he could be reelected himself. So that's good news. But what is still threatening is that you have all of these wounded politicians still in office. They're not out of office yet. And politics is a survival business. I've run many hotly contested races, and I was very good at winning them. But I'm going to tell you, it is a survival battle. And when you get wounded career politicians like they are willing to do almost anything to avoid the consequences of their actions. And so just like a wounded animal that's cornered can become very dangerous, and wounded politicians are animals who can become very dangerous. So they're more and more reckless. There are calls now to increase our nuclear readiness, and we've got the, this goes back some time when the Senate Armed Services Committee was examining, what do we do in response to the outbreak of war and Russia's special operation. And there's U.S. Senator Roger Wiker who said, quote, "We don't rule out first use nuclear action." Now, what is first use nuclear action? I think the best example we have, or the best analogy, is what happened at Pearl Harbor that kicked off the Second World War. Japan had made desperate overtures to the White House under Franklin Roosevelt to ward off war. They knew that they were no match for the industrial might of the United States, and they were almost willing to give just anything to the United States. And the United States, all secretly, just sort of blew them off. And the next thing, they just felt, what do we do at this point? And they ordered the strike on Pearl Harbor. Now, what happened at Pearl Harbor was first use attack by aircraft carriers. And it wasn't nuclear action. This was conventional action, but it was first use. In other words, it kicked things off. There hadn't been an attack by the other side. It was a surprise attack. So when we think about we don't rule out first use nuclear action, we need to be thinking Pearl Harbor, a nuclear Pearl Harbor by the United States against Russia in an attempt to knock out its nuclear power. Now, I hope that the people making this decision understand how unlikely it is that the United States, with all of its vast nuclear power, that we can knock out the Russian nuclear deterrence in a first strike. There are nuclear submarines with extremely advanced weapons, more advanced than what the United States has. And those Russian submarines are deployed. I'm sure we're tracking some of them. Yeah. And you could say, well, we can knock out half of them, or we can knock out.
You probably remember the Russian subs. I mean, I'm retired Navy. They would just follow us around the world.
Sure. Sure. The Soviet subs were out there, and the Russian subs are there today. We play a cat and mouse game. Mm-hmm. We detect them sometimes. I don't know how often. I'm not that current on it, but I have a feel for what's going on. And with the weapons that they carry, you look at places that will unquestionably be targeted with multiple strikes from multiple submarines and ground-based ballistic missiles and everything. What are the key targets? Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., if we decide to launch first use nuclear strike, as Senator Wiker alluded to, Washington, D.C. will be radioactive glass for 1,000 years. There will be nothing. There will be no human life in Washington, D.C.
Well, I mean, there's no human life there right now either, but
I know what you mean. But we've got all these politicians there, and they're making all of this money from weapons and so forth. Now, will they go into underground bunkers? Yes. Will they be protected? Will they survive the first exchange of nuclear weapons? there's a good chance that they will for initially. But but what do you command when you emerge from your molehill and you say, "Hey, look at this! We got everything. Look at what we've got." Well, and everything has been burned and blasted to nothing. Yeah, some of these nuclear weapons that are available to the U.S. and to Russia today are 1,000 times as powerful as the bombs we dropped in the Second World War on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so Washington would disappear. The CIA building and all of those things, the Pentagon, people think, well, what would Washington and the Pentagon look like after the nuclear exchange? Would we see this rubble of the Capitol and maybe the Washington Monument would be broken in half? No, there would be nothing. There would be nothing. The monuments, all the graves at Arlington Cemetery, there would be nothing in Washington. The Pentagon would only exist as a geographical location on some maps if they still existed. New York City, all human life in New York City would cease to exist. I mean, if there was 0.5% of the people who survived in New York City for 2 weeks, it would be a miracle. You look at the Newport News shipyards. You look at the world's greatest naval base at Norfolk, Virginia. Those would just disappear. They would be gone. Everything on the coast of Virginia would just disappear. And it goes on from there. I mean, you can look at the scenario and you can say which places would go first, which ones might not be struck. But you can guarantee that Berlin, Paris, Brussels, Helsinki, it just goes on and on, that those places will be destroyed. You think about Rome. I wish that the Italian government would dig in its heels a little bit more on this. I don't think the people of Italy, and I'm not even sure that all of the Italian government is on board with this, but Italy has been just way too far out. If something breaks out, I don't think Russia has a choice but to destroy Rome. And I've been to Rome. I love Rome. It's just one of the most wonderful cities on earth, and it captures the grandeur of perhaps the greatest civilization in all human history. And you can walk there among the buildings and the great things. After the war, there would be no Rome. There would be no record of Rome. There would be no aqueducts. There would be all of these things would disappear from the earth. And this is the gamble that these people are taking as they move us closer and closer. Now, the only reason we're doing this is we are moving right up toe to toe, nose to nose, nuclear bomb to nuclear bomb right on the Russian border. That is our objective. And we're trying, that's pretty clear, we're trying to break up Russia, break it into
balkanized Russia
pieces. You can see now a little action going on in Dagestan. We saw that happen in Chechnya before. We have the Muslim uh, the various segments of Russia that have a strong Muslim population and normally very loyal, they're some of the best fighters today. But you can see the efforts of intelligence agencies to poke and prod a little bit, see if we can stir up a little animosity. I think the attack on the theater in Moscow, the Crocus Theater, with the slaughter of all of the Russians who were there at the theater, I think that was designed to elicit an emotional reaction from President Putin that would involve something that might create a division between the Christian and the Muslim people of Russia. And President Putin, he has got a steady hand on the tiller. He is as rational as any human being on the face of the earth. And thank God he is, because if he were emotional, if he were the kind of person to just fly off the handle or, get red-faced and say, let's do this, I'm not sure that civilization would exist today.
Well, you keep mentioning sleepwalking into World War III, but do you think that we've picked up the pace? I do want to show this video really quick because it is a new angle of the attack on Crimea, and then I want your thoughts on the weapons used and what happens now. So 1 second. Sorry about that, not having any sound because it's closed circuit, but we can see that was definitely a cluster munition, yes?
Yeah, it's my understanding that that Ukraine used ATACMS missiles, probably guided by American drones, targeted by the drones. I don't think that even the CIA deliberately targeted the people on the beach, but they selected flight paths for the missiles, and they scheduled this on Holy Trinity Sunday when they knew that the beach would be full of people on holiday, and so they knew that this was a very distinct danger, because the large majority of these missiles are shot down on both sides. So when they go down, that there's a risk, and particularly when you have these ATACMS missiles, they have quite a wallop, and in this case, these were armed with cluster munitions. Now, it's important to think about this, because if you're trying to knock out a bridge, a ship, an ammunition depot, some military target, you don't use cluster munitions, you use high explosives, because you want to go in. You're not going to bring down those targets with cluster munitions. Cluster munitions are designed to kill people, and they're designed to disperse widely so that wherever you run the risk of triggering one of these cluster bombs that shower out. And of course, that's why so many children are killed, and why half of the world has outlawed them, because when these cluster munitions fall, they can sit there for 10 years, and then some little boy or girl looks at them and says, "Oh, look, this is fun," and picks them up and blows their face off. So this is just another one of these reckless things where I think the message to the forces from Washington, from the White House, is we must not lose. We must keep this going at least through November. And so there may not be ATACMS missiles with the high explosive warheads available. All you've got is the cluster munitions. So you say, well, heck with it. We know if we're not taking action, the White House is going to be upset with us, and so you do it. And it's just another one of everything we're ratcheting up, and it may very well get us to World War III. We're quite close to it now.
Do you think that the visits, obviously want to ask you about Asia, do you think that Putin's recent visits to DPRK and Vietnam ratcheted up even further? And also, what do you think about those visits? Kim was extremely excited, a lot of great positive feedback off of that trip. Didn't hear much about the Vietnam trip, but still as important. What are your thoughts on these two? And how much of a threat are they to the United States, or perceived threat, I guess I should say, to the United States government?
Okay, the big news was North Korea. And, for people who have watched North Korea for a lifetime, they can tend to be a little bit dismissive and say, there's always stuff going on with North Korea. But some very dramatic things have just happened because, for one thing, President Putin has just formed a military alliance with North Korea. And it is sort of a NATO-style alliance, which says that aggressive action against one is aggressive action against both. And so President Putin has said, okay, the treaty obligations are not triggered right now, but the treaty does say that if they're triggered, then you use all means necessary to assist the other country. And so what he did do, though, in addition to putting in place that treaty, is he also said, we're going to begin supplying advanced weapons to Korea. Now, we don't know what those are. And like a poker player, President Putin is keeping his cards close to his vest. We don't know. And the reason that he has started to open the door to providing these weapons is that North Korea has been sort of out of touch with anybody for so long. Russia traditionally has cooperated with the United States when the United States is worried about the nuclear threat. Russia was very sympathetic and backed up the United States in the UN Security Council and allowed sanctions to be imposed on North Korea because they didn't want to see an expansion of the nuclear threat. Russia came to the aid of the United States when we were on our hour of need and said, hey, look, they're producing long-range missiles now and they're equipping them with nuclear warheads. And Russia said, okay, we'll help you. We'll impose sanctions. We'll allow you to pass the sanctions through the United Nations. So now Russia is not going to do that. We've lost that vote that we had that was so important to us in dealing with North Korea, because instead of reciprocating and saying, okay, now you have protected us from nuclear, we protected you from nuclear threats, now you protect us. And the United States says, well, no, we're gonna be the nuclear threat.
We are
We are the nuclear threat. So, of course, that was destabilizing. Now, the thing is, if Russia were to provide hypersonic missiles to North Korea could destroy the capital of South Korea, Seoul, within 1 minute, using hypersonic missiles with nuclear weapons on board. So that literally, if the South Koreans saw the incoming missiles, they could scarcely blink their eyes before all life in Seoul, Korea ended. And so the South Koreans are very, very troubled by the fact that this has happened. And they're very concerned about what those weapons might be. Now, they've responded by saying, well, we'll provide weapons to Ukraine. Well, they've been providing weapons to Ukraine. They do it through this shell game where the United States has sent so many of its shells that our stockpiles are down close to nothing. And so Korea has sent artillery shells to replenish our stockpiles so that we can continue emptying them out to Ukraine, and we won't have to hold any back because we know we're getting them from Korea. So we've been providing shells, or the South Koreans rather have been providing 300,000 artillery shells that we know of through the shell game. So now they're threatening to send weapons. There are additional things that they could send that they haven't done before. But you could just see, it's like now we have South Korea in a total state of uproar. We've created tensions on the border of South Korea and North Korea that have not existed since the time of the Korean War. And this is a direct consequence of the fact that the United States provided long-range weapons and gave the green light for Ukraine to attack targets inside the country of Russia. And so it is a terribly dangerous time. My hope is that we get to November, and then we have to get beyond November into January. We got to make it all the way to January.
We'll get to that, but I do want to ask about the Philippines, because that was a big topic for you, and not a lot of people talk about it, especially with the United States Navy bases closing and now possibly reopening bases. And I don't know if it was you or someone else, but someone said that will be the Ukraine of Asia and not Taiwan. And kind of wanted to know what your feelings are, especially given Putin's visit to Vietnam and tensions in the Philippines.
Yeah, I have a little different view of that. Now, let me first deal with Vietnam, if I could, because I think we can dispose of that fairly quickly. President Putin followed up his very historic visit to North Korea with one to Vietnam. Now, Vietnam owes a great deal to Russia because the Soviet Union was their arms supplier, their primary arms supplier during the Vietnam War. I've got steel in my arm and leg, most likely thanks to the old Soviet Union. So they have that emotional attachment, but emotions only go so far.
Right.
The fact is that the United States is the largest trade partner for Vietnam today. And Vietnam runs a huge trade surplus with the United States. In other words, they take in a whole lot more than they purchase of American goods. And so there is no relationship of greater importance to Vietnam than the relationship with the United States today. So while at an emotional level, they wanted to be as accommodating as they could to President Putin, at a very pragmatic level, the day following the departure of President Putin, they announced that they had these wonderful relations with the United States, and then the United States sent its top envoy, the individual who was in charge of all of the Asian area, and he landed in Hanoi almost right after President Putin, and said relations between the countries have never been better. And I think what he said was accurate, because as a practical matter, Vietnam is just coming out of several very difficult economic years, and yet they're in this time of great expansion and modernization across the country. They cannot afford to lose the United States as a trading partner. And also, historically, their greatest fear has been the Chinese. China and Vietnam fought a very, very bloody war, a border war, very quickly after the United States withdrew from Vietnam. Very few people are even aware of it, but it was a significant war. And just historically, there's always caution on the part of the Vietnamese about the Chinese. So while I don't think they will join an alliance against China, because they do a lot of business with China too, I think they will be very happy to be closely aligned to the United States. So I don't foresee Russia making great headway. There are things that they can do with Vietnam, certain trade and so forth. So it was a productive visit for President Putin, but it was not, he wasn't hitting the ball out of the park in Vietnam. Now, with Philippines, he did not go to the Philippines, but he has been to the Philippines in the past. And he, after the war broke out in Ukraine, President Duterte, he's now gone, but he sort of surprised everyone, because he had considered President Putin to be almost a godlike figure to him. He was very complimentary. And then just before he left office, he was very critical of the special operation in Ukraine. Who knows what all was going on and what promises had been made to get him to take that position. But maybe it was genuine. I just don't know. Or maybe he was assured that nobody would shoot him in the back if he came out and took the position that the United States wanted. But in any event, that's just pure speculation. The fact is that if you look at the history of the Philippines and the U.S., now outsiders will look and say, oh, well, the Philippines was just a colonial empire of the United States. And that's, in a sense, it's accurate, but it ignores enormous emotional bonds between the Filipino people and the American people. We have great numbers of Filipinos who have integrated beautifully into American society, very productive, very, very law-abiding, good citizens. For many, many years, for 100 years, the U.S. Navy has set aside positions for Filipinos, and they're part of the Navy, part of the U.S. Navy. And there are tremendous numbers of Filipinos who send money back to the Philippines because they make so much more money here than they do in the Philippines. So these are blood ties between the people, and I think it's a little easy for outsiders to say, well, it's just a colonial relationship. Yes, it's that, but it goes far beyond that. So I just think with the relationship between the U.S. and Philippines is so enduring that it's not going to go away, and it's always going to be a challenge for either the Chinese or for the Russians to have a real strong influence there. And of course, now the Chinese are somewhat at loggerheads with the Philippines over these offshore islands that China is constructing throughout the South China Sea. I've always felt that particular program of China's to build up those offshore islands was counterproductive, but that's just me. I've never felt that, particularly in the relations with other nations on the South China Sea, that has been a positive rather than a negative for China. I mean, it hasn't helped the Chinese, and it's actually done more harm than good. So, but I think if you boil it down now, the one thing we haven't touched on that sort of falls in that same realm is the announcement just the other day that Prime Minister Modi of India will be flying to Moscow in early July. And he's just been reelected to another term of office. Very, very powerful man in India, a staunch friend of Russia's and one of its most essential trading partners. Now, India is a very, very big deal. They're sort of in this catbird seat where the United States needs them in this alliance that we're forming to bottle up China. And at the same time, Russia has long traditional ties. They're their principal arms supplier, and they trade in oil. It's enormously important. And so India is able to balance. The United States can't really get too strong-willed against India because they just cannot afford to completely lose them. So it puts India in a very nice posture. It's been a tremendous moneymaker for India to bring in all of this inexpensive Russian oil. So it's essential to both sides. So President Putin's diplomacy overall has been very, very powerful and very important. You sort of win some, you lose some, but if you look at the ones that he has won, India and North Korea, those are extremely, extremely important.
And now we'll move over to our actual hot war or escalating hot war in the Levant. So we have Israel doing its thing where it kind of hems and haws, but it wants to start another fight up in the north. United States says, yes, we'll support that. But then the United States also deploys 2 aircraft carrier strike groups and pulls the Eisenhower in. I deployed on the Eisenhower, fun fact, but it's putting out the Truman and the Roosevelt out to the Persian AOR. How close are we to hot war in the Levant and the Middle East, I guess?
You were saying that you served on the Eisenhower?
I did in 2016. And when they sent it out to Yemen, I said, oh no, like not that ship, please,
Sure.
not that one. So I'm surprised it lasted out there that long. It gave it a good 10 months. I was pretty surprised. And
Yeah.
do you think that it got hit as well? I mean, that was a long deployment anyway, probably due to go back, but it was just interesting that it all lined up at that time.
I'm not sure whether it was hit or not. The Houthis, who are the force that governs Yemen, they believe that they hit the Eisenhower, and I believe they're honest and sincere in saying it. I don't think they're just saying something. The Pentagon has said absolutely they did not hit the Eisenhower. I'm not sure what they did or not, honestly. I between the two, I just don't know. But in any event, they haven't seriously damaged the Eisenhower if they did strike it. But the Eisenhower had been there so long, it was just an excessively long deployment for which I wouldn't be surprised to see them get the Presidential Unit Citation for having
and
a
battle and all of that. Yeah.
Yes. So kudos to the I love our troops. I think they're great, and I could have been a Navy man if my stomach had been stronger. But I spent my time aboard aircraft carrier, laying in the berth in the bunk, and then periodically staggering down to the mess hall, and I'd stuff saltine crackers in my face and try to get them to calm my stomach and eat and get back out. But I didn't spend all my time that way. I spent a lot of time flying into battle off the carrier. So, but in any event, let's see, where were we going?
Do we think we're going to get a hot war?
Yeah,
involving I mean, that's a lot of jets out there.
Well, the just to sort of touch on the Houthis, the Houthis are very, very poor desert tribesmen in Yemen. They are almost unconquerable. They are a warlike people. They are courageous. If people get arms and legs blown off, other people step forward and they're anxious to fill their places and fight. Over decades and decades, countries have tried to conquer them. Way back, I don't know when it was, but I'm sure I was a young man when Egypt fought a war there, and they lost the war, and they're never going to go back and fight in Yemen again. More recently, the Saudi Arabians decided they were going to take out these whippersnapper people in this desert country and show them a thing or two. And Saudi Arabia attempted to attack Yemen. They were aided by the UAE that sent troops in, and they were allied with Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the terrorists who had been at war with the Houthi tribesmen. And so you had this alliance of Saudi Arabia, the UAE. The United States provided support. We provided all of the intelligence targeting various things to assist Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And the war was a disaster. And Saudi Arabia just finally decided to cut their losses and say, to heck with this. We can't mess with these Saudi tribesmen. They keep wiping us out every time we attack them. And so the war died down. I doubt that the Pentagon was anxious to get involved in a war against the Houthis, because they understand the terrain of Yemen is devilishly complex. There are these great ravines, and the houses are built inside of ravines up against the side. And so they're very difficult targets to attack. And the Houthis now are very experienced. Their level of drone warfare is quite advanced, and they have effectively interdicted shipping coming out of the Red Sea. There's a choke point of just a few miles in width, and they control it, and they have sunk a number of ships. Now, I don't know what it is, half a dozen ships now, perhaps, and they've damaged a great deal of other. And the importance of it is that it causes the insurance costs for shipping to just go stratospheric. And so it has cut down shipping. Anything that is providing shipping to Israeli ports at the end of the Red Sea is they're going after it. And so we're not going to get control of the Houthis while this war continues. It's just a condition that we're going to have to just continue fighting, continue sending aircraft carriers, trying to keep the Red Sea open, but there's just so much we can do. I would like to talk about the growing possibility that Israel will attack Lebanon.
Yes, please.
Okay, now this is very important because I doubt that the Pentagon has a real firm grip on exactly what it means to attack Hezbollah. I think for many Americans, they think, okay, you got Hamas and they're fighting in the Gaza Strip. You got Hezbollah. Well, they're just, a bunch of these rather poorly armed, poorly trained people, and they're fighting. Yeah, they're fighting for all they're worth. But I think it's important for the Pentagon to understand Hezbollah is nothing like Hamas. It has no relation. In fact, they're different religions. Even Hamas, they're Sunni Muslims, and Hezbollah are Shia Muslims, the Shiites, as many people call them. Israel has fought Hezbollah before on the Lebanese border. The purpose of Hezbollah, the reason that they exist, first of all, Hezbollah is a political party in Lebanon. Lebanon is governed in a what they call a confessional form of government, where a Christian is always the president or prime minister, I can't remember which, is the top guy. And then you have the Speaker of the House, who is another faith. And anyway, there's several different, it's sort of a division of power among the Christians, the Sunnis, and the Shia. And in any event, so it is a part of the government, but it also is a major armed force. Now, this is not a backwater, untested group of people. I watched them throughout the Syrian war. Now, I tracked the Syrian war literally before it began, all the way until once the Ukrainian war kicked off. I changed focus, but I sort of keep a little watch on Syria even today. But of all of the forces that were fighting on the ground for Syria, probably the most powerful one were Hezbollah. Hezbollah has enormous combat experience in urban settings. They fought in all of the major urban battles that the Syrian army fought, and they're extremely well disciplined, very highly trained. They have been on the front lines. All of their senior officers, look, what we would think of as like majors, lieutenant colonels, generals, that sort of level unlike the United States, where those folks have rather modest combat experience in actual battle, you could say that within Hezbollah, literally every one of those combat leaders has life and death combat experience in extremely bloody, harsh, fierce combat. Something that I doubt that there's a flag officer on active duty in the Pentagon today who has that type of experience. And then on top of that, we believe they have fairly advanced weaponry. They have a great number of rockets. And if you go back traditionally, the rockets that are used by these various groups are not terribly effective. But I believe that what Hezbollah has are missiles that are capable of being precisely targeted with high explosive capability. And I think it is possible for them. They actually disclose the fact that they have the ability to locate with drones precise targets, air bases, training bases, depots, cities, and this type of thing. And they've actually shown the drone footage so that the West and so that Israel would understand you're not playing games with some minor backwater force. These are not some rabble that's out in the desert that runs up and sets off a bomb. This is an army. It is a highly disciplined, highly trained army. And they, in my judgment, now, you have various opinions on it, but Israel attacked Lebanon in 2006, I believe 2006, 2007. And they went in totally unprepared for what they encountered. And the Israeli army was entangled suddenly in urban warfare, and they weren't ready for it. And it was not very long before Israel decided, let's pull these troops out, cut our losses. We just can't afford to be fighting Hezbollah. So Israel is counting on forcing the United States, compelling the United States to enter the war directly against Hezbollah. I think that the Biden administration is doing everything in its power to avoid being dragged in, because we're fighting so many wars, so many places. We're fighting everybody all over the globe. We're fighting Russia. We're fighting the Palestinian people in Gaza. We're fighting the people in Syria. We're just fighting and we're preparing for a global war against China. We're just like lunatic. I tell you, the President of the United States should require everybody in the Central Intelligence Agency and the Pentagon to take Valium, starting the day he's elected. Put the whole bunch of this on Valium and say, relax, guys, relax, chill out. I'm gonna call a maybe in 3 waves, we're gonna send all of you on home leave so that you can rest and recuperate and try to recover your sanity, because they've just worked themselves into a mad frenzy. It's very, very dangerous for the United States, for the entire globe.
Well, speaking of lunatic Americans, we'll talk about Biden and then the presidential election. But
I don't call him a lunatic. That's enough for me.
Biden is absolute. I don't know what he is, a zombie, a lunatic. Trump said that Biden, you mentioned earlier, he provoked the war in Ukraine. And with his words about Ukraine joining NATO, on the flip side, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that to Russia, things in Ukraine will never change regardless of the election's outcome, that American foreign policy doesn't really change regardless of later. But in all seriousness, what can Trump feasibly do to change the outcome of this war or to shorten the durations, besides withholding the aid? And will he do that? And can he do that? Because didn't he try to disarm Ukraine before, and it resulted in a huge uproar in the Senate?
Well, there was a very fine article online. It was by CNN, and it was titled 5 Ways the Trump Administration Would Be Different, or something like that. You can Google it easily, and it's well worth reading. And it lays out 5 different areas. And the first one it talks about is the difference between Congress then and Congress now. And back when President Trump was elected, the congressional leadership and key members of the Senate and the House hated his guts, hated everything that the American people had been promised that he was going to do. The Republican leadership wanted open borders, huge spending. They wanted wars, all of those things. And they were determined to block him, even if it meant bringing down the President of the United States, which they attempted to do. CNN this article does a magnificent job of laying out how the people who opposed him just have all been eliminated. They just, there were 10 people who voted against him on January 6th, and every one of them is gone, and key people everywhere. So it's a totally different Congress. It goes on. It talks about the judiciary and how vastly different that is. Anyway, he will have a different environment. I personally believe he was deliberately undermined in his personnel selections, and I won't go too deeply into that, but I think he has learned some very painful lessons. He had a cabinet who, in large part, hated his guts and disagreed with everything that he stood for. I just talked with somebody just the other day who works for one of the agencies, not a military agency, and said, yeah, he said our top guy in this agency was just crystal clear. He hated the president, disagreed with him, and intended to buck him at every step. I believe, and time will tell, but I believe that former President Trump, has learned some very painful lessons about personnel. I don't think he'll make the same mistakes with cabinet. I hope he doesn't. If he wants to get anything done, he won't do that again. And also, I think he will put his people in place instead of just allowing the George Bush people and the Obama people and the Clinton people and all to continue to do what they'd always done. That'll remain to be seen, but I expect now he will come in. He can only serve 4 years. It's going to be a very unique situation. And I expect he's going to hit the ground running, and he is going to be swinging with both fists and trying to get control of this bureaucracy that has stripped us of so much of our traditional freedom in America. So we'll see what happens. But now, as far as shutting down the war in Ukraine, I do believe that he is serious about this. And I think he could do, he talks with people. He doesn't just go through all of these minions and they say, well, you can't do this. He'll pick up the phone with President Putin and he'll say, look, I've committed to ending this war and doing it really fast, but I'm going to need some help from you. And what I'm going to ask you to do is I want you to announce a freeze in place, a limited ceasefire for a short period of time. And if you do that, then I'm gonna talk with Zelensky next. And I think President Putin will say, I won't guarantee you that there won't be shooting that occurs somewhere, but as a general proposition, if they're not attacking, we will attempt to hold our fire. He's then going to pick up the phone with Zelensky and say, look, I've committed to end this within 24 hours. Obviously, there's a couple days flexibility in that, but the war is going to end, and I would like your cooperation. And if you'll cooperate, we'll make sure that things go well for you and and the people closest to you. And but then he could say, if you don't, then what's going to happen is we're going to begin. I'm going to have the CIA begin to choose your successor, and we're going to cut off your access to U.S. satellite intelligence. And I've spoken to Elon Musk, and he has agreed that when President asks, he will shut down the Starlink satellite system that you use for your targeting and for moving your troops around. And basically, he'll blind the Ukrainian army. And at the same time, he'll halt all weapons shipments. He'll pull all unnecessary personnel out of Ukraine, and he'll just force them. Now, I think Zelensky, once the election's over, he'll understand. Okay, this is it. And the end is here, and then his best bet, his best gambit will be to say, yes, Mr. President, I understand you've done that. I'm prepared to go to the peace table and to work this out. I think that Trump would probably be pretty sympathetic towards that. That would give the deep state a voice, because Zelensky is the representative of the global oligarchs who control so much of the world's foreign policy. And so that they would begin negotiating back and forth. But I think Zelensky at that point would be forced into a ceasefire. And once the guns stop, the Ukrainian people have suffered so horrifically from this war. And I think when they see a chance to lay down the guns, I think they're going to say, okay, let's stop this. Let's bring the guys home. I suspect that the war will end with Russia holding pretty much where the line is at the end. They may straighten up some lines to correspond with the oblast. I think that if Zelensky does a good job negotiating, he'll get some guarantees that he can keep Kharkiv and Odessa, and he better hope that he can, because otherwise he's just has a rump country after that. But I do believe that Trump can bring about an end to the war, and I think he can do it promptly, and I think he can do it despite the fact that he hit a buzzsaw before. I don't think he's going to hit the same buzzsaw, because I believe he's going to put people in charge of the Pentagon and the State Department and the CIA who are just not going to put up with the kind of stuff that happened the last time.
Well, last question and final thoughts. Tomorrow's debate. I'm looking forward to it. Are you looking forward to it? And what do you think that will be the outcome of the? Well, I'm a Trump I guess I'm a Trump supporter for this election, but I'm very much looking forward to this debate. Are you? What do you think will come out of it, and your final thoughts?
Yeah, debates are notoriously unpredictable. I've been in many of them myself, and I know how they go. Biden has everything on the line. His people are very nervous about his performance. He will be on steroids, Ritalin. You know, they probably got a package, but we've seen before that there'll be times when he seems to stumble very badly. Other times when he gets up and he's sort of energetic and has his thoughts together. So I wouldn't underestimate him, but he's got more at stake than Trump has in this. I wouldn't predict what's going to happen. I'll just tell you, as an example of how unpredictable things are, I ran a Senate race against the wife of Andrew McCabe, the FBI agent who was so greatly discredited. His wife was a pretty good campaigner. And we went into this thing at the Chamber of Commerce, and she and I were sitting there, and they were firing some questions. And I wasn't the best debater in the world. I had my ups and downs, but on this particular day, they asked me something. I don't know what was with me that day, but I came up with a quick one-liner that just set the whole room to, they were in a roar. They were laughing and clapping and just having fun. And that sort of fired me up, and I fired off a few more. And you'd have just thought there was nobody else in the race. And then the poor one, she had no experience at this. This was the first time. And it was just very difficult. It was very intimidating. So weird things can happen in these debates. So, and I'm never critical of anybody and say, well, they didn't do quite as well, or I've done great in debates, and I recall one in particular where I had a mediocre performance because I listened to the consultant telling me to do something that wasn't in my nature. And I guess if I were advising Trump anything, it's be yourself. Don't let some consultant tell you, okay, do it this way or that way. If you try to do anything that is not in your own comfort zone, if it's not part of your own skin, you're going in the wrong direction. Do what you feel comfortable doing. It's okay for them to tell you, watch out for this. Here's one way you might approach it. But if they start telling you, attack him by saying ABC, well, that doesn't work well. And that happened to me once. And I don't know. It was just awkward for me. And that gave the other side the opportunity to come and give me a couple strikes on the head. So that would be my advice to him: just be yourself and go in. And you've argued these things 1,000 times before, and you'll be doing fine. And really, the risk is on Biden's side.
Well, thank you very much for your patience today, Senator Black. We've had you for a full 2 hours. What a marathon. This is my longest stream ever, I think. But everyone, please follow Senator Black's YouTube. He comes out with videos all the time, live streams. I think every Monday, right, sir?
Yes, that's right. We do.
Every Monday. So there's the link for you guys, and senatorblack.com and his Twitter account also. Make sure you guys follow all of them. And Senator Black, why don't you tell people what you hope for them over the summer and into the election for the American people?
Well, first and foremost, I hope that that the global tensions will subside. A lot of that depends on the information that the American public gets. The American public does not support ratcheting up tension to the point where we're just on the verge of nuclear war. We don't want our children and our grandchildren to be blown to bits. And what I see is Putin constantly trying to say, look, here's what you're facing. He's trying to get through all the fog and let us know. So the first thing I would hope for them is to avoid a nuclear confrontation, and I would hope that we have a halfway legitimate election. We've got the battle of the unattended drop boxes versus the actual voters. We have one of the most corrupted voting systems on earth, and all you can do is hope to make the best of what we've got to work with. It is a very important election. You cannot afford not to vote. And anybody who says, well, I'm going to vote for some third party character to make a point. Well, after election day, nobody cares about your point. You haven't made a point. All you've done is you have given a vote to the greater of the two evils that you perceive, whether if you're on the Democrat side, if you're on the Republican side, by opting out, you're just not participating. So at the presidential level, that's certainly the case. So I would hope that that we see people get prepared, get registered to vote early if you're capable of doing it, and cast a sensible vote on things that are of grave importance to this country, which is the inflation, the total collapse of our southern border, and we're on the verge of the disintegration of the nation because we don't have borders, and we don't even have a definition of what an American is anymore. It just happens to be somebody that the cartels send over with a bag of cocaine to deliver to the United States, and that becomes what an American means. We're in a mess. This is a nightmare. We've never been in a situation like this. So if you think the nightmare is good, you know how to vote. If you think the nightmare is bad, you know how to vote.
Well, there you go. Hope for the best, or hope for the best, pray for the worst, pray for the best, prepare for the worst, whatever it is, and then get out there and vote. Thank you so much, Senator Black. Thank you guys all for joining us. Please be sure to visit all of Senator Black's socials and his website and YouTube. And we will see you on Sunday with Dan Kowalik, John Jackman again, and Eddie from Midwestern Marks with Dan Kowalik on the case for Palestine. Thanks again, Senator Black. And thanks for all of your patience through our mix-ups and our technical difficulties. Until next time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.